Alright, in this video I'm going to be covering Chapter 11, as I've said, of the Sun and Moon and the Hiding of Valinor. Now, it starts out with the Valar in council together, but they are in council together in their minds. And Tolkien kind of wrote later that the elves can kind of do this too, where they can get into someone's mind, but that person has to be receptive to it. You can't force somebody into your mind. Morgoth, of course, however, wants to, force people into doing such a thing. And there's a chapter in this book, The Nature of Middle Earth, that does cover that. There's a work called, I believe it's called the Osanwe Kenta? It's in here somewhere. Osanwe Kenta. Which, and then there's Mind Pictures is another chapter that kind of, I believe, covers all that as well. And so they tried to revive the two trees, which is not going to happen. They're dead. But each one bears one last fruit. One of silver and one of gold. A golden light. And so they decide to put these in the sky to give light to not just Valinor, but Middle Earth as well. So these become the Sun and Moon. Now, later he did try to change this, where he wanted it to be more consistent with scientific fact. But if you read the Silmarillion through the perspective of the elves and not of man, then, obviously it's a mythology, so you can say anything you want. I mean, there's myths about this kind of stuff that even they don't make sense. They're not based in scientific fact, but they're just stories. I think maybe he could have just, he did, there was no final word on that, so Christopher Tolkien didn't change anything, but I think Tolkien was probably just overthinking a little bit. Because, again, no one thinks that this is a true story. And of course, Morgoth, over his land, he covers it in darkness. Because he reared, in front of Angband when he returned, he put basically 3 large volcanoes in front, right? And so he used the fumes for that to cover all the land around in darkness, so that way his creatures don't have to bear with the light. They were afraid of the sun. You even have trolls who will turn into stone if they're out in the sunlight too long. And the Valar put in the sun and moon, each one gets a spirit to guard it. You have Tilion, who becomes the man in the moon. So, yes, there is a man in the moon. And Tolkien did write a poem about that, originally covered in the Book of Lost Tales Part 1. There was a couple poems he wrote, really. There was one called Why the Man in the Moon Came Down Too Soon. And I think the other one was The Man in the Moon Came Down Too Late, which appears in The Lord of the Rings. And we'll get to that when we get there. And a spirit of fire is sent to guard the sun, and her name is Aurion, and she is related to those spirits of fire that would become the Balrogs. And then in order to keep evil and to keep the Noldor that left out of Valinor, because they are banished from there, if they try to return, they set up a chain of islands, and there's shadows. So that way, you can't find Valinor. And not just with these elves that left, but also with mankind and dwarves or whoever else wants to sail the sea. And in the previous chapter, it says that the dwarves do not like the sound of the sea, so they won't go near it. And I forgot to mention, too, in my last video, that Melian puts over Doriath an invisible girdle to protect Doriath from the orcs and other creatures of Morgoth from re-entering. And so now everything is pretty much set before the coming of mankind. Now, what I really like about the Book of Lost Tales, the original version of this story was much longer. There's actually, I think it was 2 different stories. The Hiding of Valinor, I think, was separate. Yeah, it was separate. And then The Sun and the Moon is separate too. The Sun and the Moon contains a lot more information, and he goes really into detail about basically the sun's put in a ship that's going to sail over the skies, the moon's in a ship that sails over the skies. Really fascinating how he did that. And he even talks about in here how the moon got craters. It talks about why we have eclipses. And then it talks about time. And time is a person, even. I wonder if I could find this real quick. Because I don't think I'm going to be able to find it. I'd have to reread the whole thing. But yeah, it's really interesting to see his original vision for this tale. And yeah, this is so much more detailed. And then Christopher goes in the notes and explains stuff and the commentary. So if you've read the Silmarillion, definitely check out the Book of Lost Tales parts 1 and 2. And some of the other books that follow that also talk about how that all changed over time. It's real fascinating. And I know I've talked about it before. So go check out those videos. And that's all for this one. And then in the next video, man finally appears. Later.